Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Herp Monday number 10 and we have another great one for you. This is a salamander, got a big old mouth and looks pretty damn spooky. Today we are talking about the Hellbender. Hellbender, or Cryptobranchus alleghaniensis is the scientific name. It is part of the family Cryptobranchidae. Cryptobranchidae is the giant salamander family. Who would have thought? There's only one giant salamander in the US. There are 3 in Asia, possibly more in Asia. There's debate on whether this one species is actually 5 different species or if it is actually one. It's kind of up for debate. There used to be more in historical records, and by historical I mean geologic records, but today there are only 4 species recognized. Hellbenders are found in the eastern United States, especially up in the Northeast. You're talking about New York, around the Great Lakes, those sorts of things. I want to say most of them are on the west side of the Appalachian Mountains, but don't quote me on that. But I think that's where most of them are. Now, as I said, these are a giant salamander, but unlike other salamanders, or unlike a lot of other salamanders, these are actually fully aquatic, so they don't actually come up on the lands. Most salamanders have a larval stage, and then they actually crawl up onto land and hang out in swampy marshes. This thing has probably some of the funniest common names that you can possibly imagine. Some of the common names are devil dog, mud devil, but then we get into my two kind of favorite common names that have ever shown up on these: the lasagna lizard and snot otter. Let me repeat that. Some people call this thing a lasagna lizard or a snot otter. Now, I kind of understand the snot otter, at least. These things are apparently super slimy, but where lasagna lizard, it has to come from its skin, and we'll get into that in a bit. Yes, it kind of does look like it was driven over by a truck, and if we look at this picture here, you can see just how flat this thing is. Very flat body, very flat head. You can see the skin fold down here. Super slimy skin. You can see on here you got some more skin folds. This thing is not a very pretty. Let's be honest, this thing's not very pretty. Now, it's got this blotchy brown color. It's got these short legs. But something interesting is the front feet have 4 toes. It's got 4 little toes, but then on the back feet, it has 5 toes, and you can see it here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 toes, and these have 4. 1, 2. I think that was the one right there. Yeah, you definitely can't tell in that picture. And here's one with its mouth open, ready to get. But you can see kind of how it is in this super flattened. And you can tell in this picture is actually the best. You can see how wide, though, that tail is. It's not wide, it's tall. It's a keeled tail. Helps for hydrodynamic. They use the tail for propulsion. And the little times they actually swim. Usually these things are actually just crawling on the ground, so they don't swim very much, but they can swim. Something interesting about these is they do have working lungs, but they don't actually use them to breathe. The lungs are actually just kind of seem to be just for buoyancy. They're actually not used for breathing. How they actually breathe is from these skin folds. In these skin folds, there's a ton of capillary, which are very small blood vessels. And those blood vessels are actually absorbing the oxygen from the water itself. So that's why these are really interesting in these skin folds, being that's how they actually, breathe. And we'll get into that in a little bit more about kind of their breathing and why they are very specific on where they have to live. Now, going back into the sides, these get to about 24 to 40 centimeters, which is about 9.5 to 15.5 inches from snout to vent. And that's a really important distinction. When you're measuring snakes or lizards or salamanders, there's one measurement called an SVL, which is a snout vent length. And that's from the tip of the snout to essentially the cloaca, their little opening. Now, then there's the total length. With that actually measures the tail as well. And when you measure the tail, these get to about 30 to 74 centimeters in total length, which that's about 12 to 30 inches. 30 inches is massive, but usually they're in the much shorter range. These are the third largest aquatic salamander in the world and the largest amphibian in the United States. There are two in the Asian countries that are bigger. These weigh about 1.5 to 2.5 kilograms, according to the research, which that's about 3.5 to 5.5 pounds. So they're a decent heftiness to them, even though you'd think that they'd be a little bit heavier when you're talking about a salamander that's this big with that big of a head on it. But no, they seem to be about 4.5 pounds. These can live up to about 30 years in captivity, and it does seem like these don't get sexually mature until about 4 or 5 years. Now, these are a habitat specialist species, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those skin folds in this. A habitat specialist means that this animal cannot live in a bunch of different areas. It's really select. If it's not where it needs to be, it will essentially die. And hellbenders require large, irregularly shaped rocks with very swift water. And that flattened body is so that they can actually stay underneath those rocks and crawl up under them, and that's where they actually hide. Now, the swift water is so that they can actually breathe. If they are in too slow of a moving water, they'll actually suffocate. And what it is that water has to constantly flow over them. And something about waters and rivers, the more turbulent and the faster a water is moving, usually the more oxygen that is in this water. And when you think about how these live, because another interesting thing is these only live in very shallow water. They're about 1/10 of a meter to about 4/10 of a meter deep, super shallow water. You're talking about this salamander likes to live in water that's about that deep, maybe about your head. That water is causing a lot of turbulence, and that's what's actually causing them to breathe. Now, these feed primarily on crayfish, and they'll eat small fish and other insects, but they seem to be primarily crayfish over everything else. Now, kind of in their reproduction, what seems to happen is that the male will actually go and make a nest, and the male will entice a female, and the female will come and lay her eggs. And unlike most other salamanders, these actually practice external fertilization. So once the female lays her eggs, the male will go upstream and release his sperm while fanning his tail to make sure the sperm gets evenly distributed. As soon as they're done, the male will actually chase the female off and will kind of guard that nest. And one way that he guards that nest, or let me rephrase that, while guarding the nest, he actually keeps the eggs oxygenated. And one way he does that, he'll do it with his tail, but he'll also make those skin folds of his kind of flap and just put new water over those eggs. Now, these are an endangered species. They are primarily dying off because of habitat loss or pet trade. One thing about habitat loss is they can't handle dams very well. Dams upstream usually cause a change in the hydrologic cycle, which causes like slower moving water, more siltation, and these things can't really be in a lot of muddy waters. They really need that crystal clear, kind of what you would think a mountain stream to be. Now, even though these are illegal, they're also kind of declining due to pet trade. People have gotten these for pets. I definitely would not recommend it. But something else that has popped up that is causing a little bit more issues and concern in the scientific world is disease. There is a fungus out there. We call it the chytrid fungus. The full name of the disease or something, it's chytridiomycosis. The chytrid fungus. And the chytrid fungus is actually what it is caused some of the biggest declines in amphibians in amphibian populations across the world. It is a very, very deadly disease for these people, for these animals. Cannot stress it enough. Now, kind of your little tidbit to end the video on. As you can see here, these have eyes, but they're very, very small eyes. And those eyes actually don't even process pictures very well. They're more of just like a light sensing organ. But they have light sensing organs all over their body, on their back, especially on their tail. What they use that for is these are a nocturnal species, and so when they're hiding, they will actually use those light sensing to make sure they are fully hidden underneath the rock, because you don't want your tail exposed, so they use that to also kind of scoop and hide their tails in as well. Just a little interesting fun fact to end, y'all. But thank you guys so much again. I really hope you appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If you don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Listen, guys, Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoyed this. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you do, I would really appreciate it. If I don't see you, please have a great Thanksgiving. Have a great Christmas. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and peace.